All right, everyone. Paul Krugman, who you'll probably know as the person, he's best known for proclaiming there'd be a Great Depression if Donald Trump were elected. Like, oh, the economy will probably collapse like within a week, so it'll be kiss your ass goodbye. That's what he's best known for. He won the Nobel Prize, which means basically nothing, for economics, despite apparently not knowing how to work an economy. But he penned an article for the New York Times called "What's the Matter with Europe?" And I read the article, mainly because it was going viral this morning. Part of it is actually true, and it's something, that I said, several years ago, which is the inequality between the fiscal situations in some of the European states. The difference between the needs of a largely agrarian or a tourist-driven economy and a fully post-industrial economy, a service economy, or an economy like maybe parts of Eastern Europe, thriving more on industry itself, the more heavy side of industry. The differences are vast. The needs are vast. If you pull these states together under one currency, you might as well just have one country instead of a group of different countries with their own separate political systems. You would need to relegate them into, like, we have states, which they haven't done. They tried to through heavy-handed bureaucracy, and that's another problem. And that's where Krugman goes off the rails. He, from his neoliberal, his left-wing perspective, looks at it and says, well, austerity is to blame. Well, yeah, in some cases, but lack of it can be to blame too. It's the other side of the economic situation, and it's not just economic. Krugman deftly avoids mentioning the loss of freedom due to groups that he himself applauds. Liberal groups, in other words. Liberal according, I guess, to Krugman's standards. Herein lies the problem. You're lamenting the loss of freedom. You're talking about Hungary being, basically an autocratic state at this point. Yeah, kind of. They've gone a little bit further right, I think, than is healthy, at least in some cases. Like Orban, he seems okay. And they crack down on Soros propaganda, which I guess is good. If you did that here, then, my main nemesis wouldn't even, have a platform anywhere. He'd be the one, I guess, getting deplatformed instead of people he writes hit pieces about, which would be really funny. But no. Maybe so. But what about the autocratic nature of Western Europe, which I'm sure nations that Krugman would probably approve more of, like a Belgium or a France or a Germany or a Sweden, or certainly like UK. But they've left the EU now, but you get what I mean. In that sense, looking at those countries, is there not authoritarianism encroaching there too? And what is the preface to that? It's the social alienation. I said years ago, social alienation will rise in Europe because the parties there, the centrist, sane movements, the liberal movements that Krugman likes so much, are not capable of suppressing social alienation. You will get the rise, increasingly, as long as there's also an economic stress factor, and there will be as long as you have a migrant crisis within Europe, so it's not going anywhere anytime soon. The rise of a further right and a further left. Now, the best case scenario is that a center-left or center-right movement, a reformist movement, like a MAGA populist movement like we have here. Krugman is trying to conflate that with like the Five-Star Movement or something, which is laughable. No, our watered-down variant of Trumpite populism is capable of providing reform and addressing the issues causing the rise of social alienation without bringing extremism. It is the alternative to extremism. If people continue to try to suppress those populistic and nativistic viewpoints, which are not fringe, they would have been considered normal 20 or 30 years ago. If they continue to try to suppress them, further out their groups will rise up in that vacuum that's created. That is what will happen. It's sort of like what we saw in the Middle East. Al-Qaeda gets forced out of an area that then experiences a power vacuum. ISIS comes in. To the point where the U.S. government's like, maybe Al-Qaeda wasn't so bad after all. We're going to go talk with the Taliban over in Afghanistan to try to kick these other dudes that are so much worse out. You see, you've created a power vacuum, and then actual extremists will move in. The liberal groups are hamstrung. I'll tell you what the problem is. They can't maneuver. They can't do anything to stop this from happening, because the things that they have campaigned on over and over again, all these centrist parties within Europe, will not solve any of the fundamental issues of why there is social alienation. Krugman, from his ivory tower sort of rich, luxurious position, his award-winning economist, multimillionaire position, he is unable to see why the working and middle class of Europe or the United States would want to vote out liberal groups. Why would they want to do that? Oh, it'll reduce freedom, there'll be extremism. No, there won't. That's what happens when those groups attempt to cling on to power, when you have a paradigm that's going through and dying. An old economic paradigm and an old social paradigm at the same time are dying off in Europe. The old economic paradigm of the brief success of, basically European Union style federalist post-federal policy. The brief happiness that was enjoyed is burning away into stagnation. He correctly points out, for Italy, they've had 20 years of what amounts to a depression. You've got constant, unending economic woes. You've got the problem of an aging population in most of Europe, especially in Germany, population decline. Sweden is a few of these other nations. Italy, I believe, is one of them. In fact, I think Italy is the most severe. You've got an aging population. You've got slower growth than the third world that's being outpaced by former colonial possessions. India, the rise of India, the rise of China, the rise of certain African powers like Nigeria. Certainly the rise of the United States at this point outflanking Europe completely. The rise of all sorts of competitor economies. Europe doesn't have the ability to perpetually be on top of the world. That economic paradigm is gone. The political paradigm of Europe overall is dying, and it's fracturing, it's splitting apart. It would not be surprising if you had an Italy exit from the EU. He's talking about them leaving the euro. Yeah, it could just be they leave the currency and renegotiate their membership or something. But that does show a weakening of the EU's fabric, and it also, again, it won't address the fundamental social side of the problems that's causing a group, more nativistic group, to rise up anyway. It won't solve the issue. It'll just be a temporary measure, and other states will follow. This is how the first domino was the UK. The UK said fuck it and decided to leave. And when that happened, the EU became doomed. Here's the thing. If you're looking at the situation, I said this at the time. If the EU softballs them, says, okay, we're going to be amiable and friendly about this, the UK would immediately begin to outcompete any EU state. It would look really, really good, and other states would say, oh, well, leaving the EU might be a good thing after all, or at least leaving the currency union. Let's us do that too, and you would have the proliferation of anti-EU sentiment across the continent. If they abuse the UK, which is what they chose to do, more or less, they're trying to drain just as many fucking pence out of them as they possibly can, as many pounds as possible. Oh, they just want that money so bad. All of these people in Brussels, basically. If they choose to abuse them, which is what they did, it makes the EU's authorities look exactly like they were cast off by Nigel Farage. Abusive and insane. Totalitarian in nature. Overtly legalistic, involved only with lengthy paperwork to the point where it's absolutely dystopian. It's on full display. Farage now gets to talk about that every time he goes on fucking TV, and he's not wrong. There's a reason these groups are rising up. I find if somebody like Krugman would look at Farage, who is not nativistic, he's barely even populistic in nature. In fact, he's an anti-nativist. He's saying, oh yeah, UK we want just as many immigrants, maybe we want even more immigrants, but we want to take them from certain countries over maybe Eastern Europe. He just doesn't want a bunch of Eastern Europeans entering the UK to fill all the clerical positions. He's saying, oh, we want more people from India and former colonies and stuff. People who speak English especially. That's what Farage is all about. That's not even nativism. It's the opposite of it. He wouldn't get along very well with many people within the alt-right, I think, on this token. UKIP's platform, not exactly BNP. Krugman would cast Nigel Farage off as basically one step from Nazism. Therein lies the problem. The liberal elite of Europe is woefully out of touch. It is comprised of people that generally, as a rule, are older than the general populations, which are aging anyway, are further left than you're going to find in any of the broken down post-industrial wasteland communities of Europe. Certainly a place like the UK, famously so. Yeah, go to Dave Gaughan's hometown and see what's happening, I suppose. And they're just out of touch. They don't understand the little people. They're just not understanding them. And you keep getting these pieces, in the New York Times famously publishing them. You see this here, I think, more than in Europe. We've got to ignore, basically the flyover state people, the small town crowd, the dirt floor Bible thumpers, the gun toters, those yucky middle classers and working class and poor Americans. We've got to ignore them when they point out that we're being elitist snobs. Because, we should look down on them because for some, we should keep swilling the expensive wine. It's such a good idea. We'll win elections this way. That's how neoliberals will die. They will kill their own parties off. Now, good riddance. You'll have another 20, 30-year-long paradigm. And for at least a while, it'll be a lot less authoritarian. The populist movements are not the authoritarian ones. No, if Krugman wants to see the death of liberty, suppress the populists as though they were extremists, and actual extremists will come along, absorb all the people that then lose faith in populism. It's not, neoliberalism's not going to reabsorb them. That train has already left the station. Your paradigm is dead. It's on life support. You can keep pumping its heart all you want, but basically it's a fucking vegetable. Go ahead and see what happens. It's exactly what happened in the days leading up to Nazi Germany. I know Krugman's into economics, so maybe he doesn't understand history very much. Study the Weimar Republic and the reasons why you had those. It wasn't just, the Nazis are coming. No. It was also communists. The rise of two dichotomous factions beginning to absorb what would have been milder reformers. What starts out, you can look at sort of the Volkish mentality of some of the neo-pagan literature of the 1920s and 30s, and you can see precursors to what became the Nazi Party, but it's not the same thing. They're not saying, we're going to round anyone up. They're not planning to kill anyone. They're just talking about the restoration of, pride and culture. That's basically all it was. But because they were suppressed, because they got no traction, because the establishment said, fuck you, essentially, sick the police on people if they organize, if they bother to protest, that's what led to the rise of actual extremist intent. The same is true of communism. There were already social democrat reformers. They're saying, hey, we've got problems, let's try something different. No, we're not going to try anything different. All the Republicans and others within the context suppressed them from doing anything. And then it got to the point where they were not able to govern. The government, the United States has one advantage over Europe, which is that we don't have a situation in which there will never be a lack of governance, because you've basically got a two-party mentality. It's the only good thing about the two-party mentality, I suppose, but you're going to end up with the rise of a third party anyway. You're already seeing the Libertarian Party pulled in 10% in the last election. It shows a lot of people are really pissed off right now, and we're less socially alienated than the Europeans. Western Europe's the most socially alienated place in the world. What do you think's going to happen over there? Krugman says, liberty will probably die in the U.S. first. MAGA populism is not going to take your freedom away. Trump pointing out that the press lies all the time, that's just a statement of common sense. It has nothing to do with denigration of the First Amendment. You talking about not wanting the DOJ to do its job would be loss of freedom. I think that sets a pretty bad precedent, yeah. You and others like you encouraging constant big tech censorship of people like me who we're libertarians or centrists, honestly. Classical liberals, libertarians, populists, mild nativists. People who are not outside, really, of the Overton window. We're saying, hey, constrain government more, speak freely, we should have a national debate because the old order isn't working. If we have that debate peaceably, no one's being suppressed, there's not going to be any extreme movement rising up. There's not going to be any cross burners waving, running down your streets. There aren't going to be a bunch of commie hit squads rising up and putting turrets on the corners. But that's what you could end up getting. You could end up with a shit hits the fan situation if you continue down the road the neoliberals are currently championing. It's your fault. It's not the fault of populists. It's not the fault of evil Nazis. They just don't understand. Or nativism. It's not even the fault of the far left. You're trying to suppress them too. Actual progressives are constantly beaten down. That hit piece the other day about Bernie Sanders' army being in disarray. Well, yeah, it is. It's going to keep it because there again is your mild reform. That would have passed as a mildly reformist left-wing movement. I don't agree in any way, shape, or form with Sanders-style economics, but it's not communism. It's a few steps away from communism, in all honesty. Joking and hyperbole aside, I recognize there is actually a fundamental difference there. It's democratic socialism, so you can vote the abuse into power, I guess. But it's not the same as the pink-haired social justice warriors who think Sanders is far right. Oh, he's just another right-winger, and he's white and male, so he shouldn't be speaking, basically. Yeah, and then they had an article during the election, I think it was Salon, talking about Hillary Clinton shouldn't be goy-splaining to him. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Are you fucking nuts? No, people like Krugman are nuts. You're managing Western Europe into decline. People have begun to notice, whoops, yeah, there's a problem. Because they don't want to tolerate that anymore. That's about all. Peace. Peace out.